Stories have a way of making people tune in to what is possible and what is not. This story is an attempt at what makes a narration gripping and suspenseful. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Make sure to follow me on all the major social media platforms so that you can stay up to date with news about where and when I post which content on all the platforms. The links to which you can find in the description below and also in the About page of my YouTube channel. I will post the audio-only version of the story on my podcast called Darkcast, which is available on Spotify and Google Podcasts, and the story or text-only version on my subreddit, immediately after I have uploaded the video version on this channel. Again, you will find the links to all these in my About page and the video description as well. So, gather around, settle down, as the classes of DrDark are now in session. The screams haven't stopped. The night seems to drag on as this nightmare isn't in a mood to cease. It is becoming unbearable. The screams are growing louder and louder by the second, and I'm afraid that it is going to get me soon. I am not going to make it, I know. So I am writing this account in my journal for posterity. If you find my journal, that means I am dead, and it got me. Please, study my journal entries carefully and save yourself from the mudman, or you will be its next target. This was the final journal entry of William Wallace dated 15 February 1984. Back then, I was a private investigator who was working freelance out of Nebraska, and I had under my belt almost 50 solved cases. I had solved many cases of varied plots and motives, but this case was so sinister and horrifying, I quit for good. It has been 37 years since I quit, and now the world has advanced, and I can put William Wallace's story, along with my story, to a greater audience. As weird and made up this case would sound like, it is so true that it still gives me goosebumps to this day. This case, in my almost 25 years of being a private investigator, was the most terrifying one I had ever taken. So let me start from where it all began and how this case came to be. The day was February 23rd, 1984. I was back then a 35-year-old private investigator working out of Bellevue, Nebraska, and had built up quite the rep there. Not to toot my own horn, but people used to call me the Sherlock Holmes of Nebraska, and would always use my assistance in helping them with private cases and sometimes county police cases as well. The cases were often those hilarious generic types, which we have become so fond of from watching movies, like spying on someone as the client suspected of that person to be having an affair, only for it to turn out that the suspected person was just meeting their friends. Although I would be lying if I said that such cases haven't found their way to my desk during the course of my career. Cases were gripping and interesting as well, and involved murders, robberies, missing persons, you name it. The list is so long that I can write a book about it, but that is for another day. That day was like any other day, and I also remember it like it was yesterday. My assistant Sarah, who was back then working for me so that she could pay off her college debt, was a sweet girl who was always polite and never afraid from working hard. It was because of her that I was able to solve people's cases efficiently and quickly. Sarah, wherever you are, I am forever indebted to you. I wouldn't have been here without your constant support and help. Coming back to my story, I was sitting in my office, going over some old case files as I was passing my time. Suddenly, Sarah shouted in a means to call me, "Mr. Lopez, somebody is here to see you, and she is insisting to see you urgently." I always told people to book an appointment before so that we can discuss a case and the formalities in an orderly fashion. So seeing that this was very odd, I went outside to see what the ruckus was all about. As I approached Sarah's desk, I saw a woman, probably in her mid-30s, with golden brown hair, impatiently asking Sarah to let her meet me. When I reached there and before I could speak, she spoke. "Are you David Lopez? Please, I need your help." I insisted on her booking an appointment prior, but she wouldn't listen. "Please, you don't understand. It's my father. He has been missing for a couple of weeks." As she was saying this, I could see that she was pretty shaken up and frightened. So, breaking protocol and also in an attempt to calm her down, I told her to come into my office and asked Sarah to bring her a glass of water. After she had settled down and calmed her nerve, I asked her, "Ma'am, are you okay now?" She nodded, affirming my query. So I asked her a follow-up question. "Ma'am, tell me what happened." This is what she told me that day. While I had heard many plots and details about many cases in the past, the details she gave me was something I had never heard of before or encountered in my profession. My name is Jessica Wallace. My father is William Wallace, and we have lived in Nebraska for almost our entire life. My father is a hunter, and quite conveniently, we live near the Fontanelle forests, just a couple of miles out from Bellevue. On January 18th, he had gone to the forest with a couple of friends as a part of his annual hike he takes every year. He owns a cabin in the deeper part of the woods where he and his friends camp out for a couple of days, hunt animals, and overall have a good time. That day, he packed his usual hiking bag and at 10 a.m. waited for his friends to arrive. After about half an hour or so, his friends, Jackson Cale and Hugo Lee Montgomery, arrived at our house with their own hiking bags and a jeep, and they started for their hike at exactly 11 a.m. Jackson and Hugo are my father's childhood friends, and they became very close over the years as they were in the army and served in the Vietnam War. Anyway, my father told me that he would be back by the morning of January 20th and told me not to worry. She took a pause and sipped a gulp of water from the glass and then continued. But as the night of January 20th rolled in, I began to panic, but brushed it off, thinking maybe they made a last-minute decision of staying a little longer. So I didn't think of it much and continued with my daily life. But things started to seem off and my suspicions were immediately turned out to be true. She paused and started searching for something in her bag, and after a couple of seconds, she showed me a newspaper article dated February 11th, 1984. The article read as follows. Unexplained screams heard in the woods. Possible presence of a predator. Locals advised to not enter the forest for a couple of weeks. The forest rangers are conducting a search to find the predator. More updates will be reported soon. I recognized the article immediately, but to be honest, I was not able to wrap my head around what was going on and what this lady was talking about. After reading the article, I asked her, "What does this have to do with her father's case and supposed disappearance?" She looked at me, dead in the eyes, and said, "The screams were heard in the Fontanelle forests and was heard near my father's cabin." "How would you know?" I asked, probably not making head to toe of what she was saying. She said again in a terrified way, "Our house is just an hour away from the Fontanelle forests and the screams were so loud, they kept going the whole night. The blood-curdling screams were almost demonic and I haven't slept in almost 2 nights." She paused, clearly traumatized by the whole event. She continued for the final time. "It has been almost 3 to 4 weeks now and he still hasn't returned. Please, Mr. Lopez, find my father, as I expect the worst. Please, I beg you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Demonic screams going on all night? This grabbed my attention and piqued my curiosity and my fear at the same time. After some thought on it, for a few minutes, I agreed to Jessica's plea and assured her that I would help her find her father and also assured her not to worry. This marked the beginning of one of my most dangerous and scary cases I had ever taken, which eventually made me quit private investigating forever. Starting from February 24th, I did some research on the Fontanelle forests and the animals that lived in that patch of woods where Jessica's father supposedly went missing. During my research, I found something very odd, which startled me deeply. There were no predatory animals like bears in the Fontanelle forests altogether, apart from the occasional raccoons, beavers, and the like. This made me question Jessica's observation as an hallucination or something. But as I had been groomed into talking with facts and figures over the span of my career, I decided to meet up with Jessica and further get my facts right to get this private investigation underway. I met Jessica on the outskirts of the Fontanelle forest on March 14th, 1984. Without wasting a single second, I asked her some routine questions, the usual, state your name and the likes of it. One question in particular struck out to be as odd as the answer, that Jessica gave to it. And the answer was very unconvincing, let's put it that way. I asked Jessica, "Why didn't you go to the police to file a missing persons report in the first place?" Jessica replied, "I was going to call the police to report my father missing, but when I heard those demonic screams, I froze, and I couldn't think straight. I saw an advertisement about your services on a newspaper and thought you were the only person who would listen to what I had to say and help me with all open-mindedness." To me, it sounded convincing, but it didn't make sense, contributing all the more to the obscurity of this case. After meeting with her, I researched on this case for another week or so. Long story short, I decided to go to William Wallace's cabin along with Jessica in the Fontenelle forests to investigate further. So on March 25th, 1984, Jessica and I started for the cabin. It took us almost 2 hours to hike to that cabin, but we eventually reached it. Now, there weren't a lot of horror movies back in the day as there are now, but let me assure you, the cabin looked like a haunted house from the outside. After seeing that it was in the middle of the deeper part of the woods, it made it all the more spooky. But what we saw outside didn't even come close to the horror we experienced when we went inside. The cabin looked like it was ransacked by a storm. The furniture was thrown all over the place. The stove was still on, and the fire in the fireplace had diminished considerably, meaning it had been lit for almost an entire night. Mind you, it has been almost 2 months since William Wallace disappeared, but the cabin looked like it had been ransacked recently, or at least the previous night, which was odd and all the more intriguing. But the scary part was yet to come. We started searching all over the cabin for important clues. Since Jessica knew all the nooks and crannies of the cabin, I followed her, and instead of me doing an investigation, I assisted in her investigation. A first for me, to be honest. After half an hour or so, I heard Jessica scream. She screamed so loud I dropped my notebook on which I was taking note of every significant detail that could help the case. I ran to check up on her, and to my horror, I saw her passed out on a wall that had blood smears all over it. This was a serious red flag, and speaking from experience, whenever there is blood, there is a body. But the strange thing was, there was no one to be found in the cabin. But I did find something misplaced as I was entering the cabin. There was dry mud stains on the wooden door and the stairs that led up to the door. This was odd, as there were no swamps in or near the Fontenelle forests, or even near the cabin, or so I thought. This little piece of evidence will make more sense later on, but let me tell you this. If you don't live near a swamp and find mud stains anywhere near your home, run and don't look back, as it will get you. I immediately took Jessica to the kitchen and spat some water on her. Even though she regained her consciousness, she was still a bit out of it. But she came to her senses after a couple of minutes. As I was about to sit on a chair in the kitchen, I noticed something out of place in the utensil cabinet opposite to me. Picture this. A black object is kept in between what was left of the beautiful pieces of cutlery which shined as the sun was setting and the night was rolling in. I immediately went and took out the black object and placed it on the table. Jessica immediately became attentive, as if she knew what I held in my hand. The object was covered in a black leather kind of material with a rope. I undid the packaging of that object and kept it on the table. To my surprise, it was a diary, almost worn out, indicating it had been used for a pretty long time. Jessica saw that diary and immediately told me, "This is my dad's journal. He has been using it since his army days. But what is it doing here?" She asked, surprised. "What do you mean?" I asked, seeing her surprised looks. "My dad never took his journal on his hikes, like ever." This wasn't a clue, but it did act as a lead on which we could further investigate on. So, out of natural curiosity and from the permission of Jessica, I started reading the journal to find any more clues that could help us find William Wallace. Let me tell you, once I read the recent journal entries, my blood ran cold. I almost dropped the journal as the journal entries were straight up terrifying. To this day, It still ranks, according to me, as the most blood-chilling account I had ever read, and that was part of the reason why I quit and never looked back to private investigating ever again. There were 4 recent journal entries, each one more scarier and weirder than the previous one, and the last one being so horrifying it made my blood run cold as I was constantly questioning the reality of the situation. Here were those journal entries that Jessica and I found on that fateful day in William Wallace's cabin. Journal entry dated January 18th, 1984. Time of record 10:45 p.m. We made it to our cabin. Even though we make this hike every year, there is a certain evergreen notion about this forest and the climb that impresses me and feels new every time. Me, Jackson, and Hugo set up our belongings and, as usual, got our pickaxes and started towards the woods to gather some wood for our fireplace. We did this every time we reached the cabin, as the Fontanelle forests tend to become colder during this time of the year, especially at night. We chopped enough wood to last us at least a single night, so we headed for home. During our way home, Jackson noticed something very strange. He saw claw marks on a nearby tree that were so big it even surpassed the length of my axe. "What the hell can have such big claws, Will?" he asked me. "Come on, man, it must have been a grizzly or something," I replied. So we didn't ponder much and reached our cabin well before night rolled in. We all had a hearty meal and drank some scotch, thanks to the trusty old Hugo who owns a scotch distribution here in Bellevue. Anyway, we went to our beds at about 11 p.m. and we ultimately fell asleep. I was woken up by a loud scream that was so demonic I froze for a second before grabbing my rifle and making my way downstairs. Everything looked fine, but the screams kept going on. Jackson and Hugo had also come down and their rifles cocked and loaded. "Man, where is that scream coming from?" Hugo asked. I knew Hugo. He never showed fear on his face. During our time in the army, he was nicknamed Stoneface, as he was always unfazed and brave, no matter how deadly or dangerous the situation he was in. But I saw fear on his face for the first time, and it showed. Something scared him good, and we believed it. Because we were scared too. The screams were becoming unbearable by the second. "Man, I can't stand this any longer," Jackson said and went outside, despite us telling him otherwise. He shot a warning shot and screamed, "Stop screaming!" Then something happened that for the life of me I can't explain yet. A big black figure suddenly came out from the bushes and grabbed Jackson. It came at lightning speed that we had never seen before. We fired shot after shot, but nothing seemed to diminish the creature's strength and speed. Suddenly, it ran back into the woods, taking Jackson with it. Before we could run to save him, the creature gave out the most horrifying scream we had ever heard. Then something fell from the trees above and on our foot, and to our horror, it was Jackson's rifle, smeared with blood. We decided we shouldn't go into the woods this late at night and went back into the cabin and made sure to lock the doors and windows. Me and Hugo sat in the living room with our rifles the entire night, terrified out of our wits and mourning that we might have lost Jackson. We had seen many horrifying things in Vietnam to last us a lifetime, but this was something else, something that was far more sinister, that would make the Vietnam War sound like a bedtime story. Journal entry dated 25th January 1984. Time of record 12 a.m. It has been almost 6 days since Jackson was taken from the cabin. Every night the screams keep escalating and becoming more demonic and out of this world. Me and Hugo haven't slept well these past couple of days. We can't even get out of the damn place as we fear the creature might target us and kill us the second we step foot outside. The fear is getting real, and we being army veterans, we never thought we will experience fear at this level. We are slowly running out of supplies. I fear that we may be killed by this creature much before we die from a shortage of food and water. And that thought was enough to make me lose hope for at least a couple of minutes before getting my head straight. It was 6:30 in the evening now. The screams have stopped. We were trying to map out the pattern of the screams to roughly estimate when and where the creature screamed. Hugo and me had enough of this. "Man, we need to get out of this place or we will die here," Hugo told me with fear in his demeanor. I get it. We were both scared after what had happened to Jackson, and didn't want to meet his fate. We are 3 days into tracking and mapping the screams. I will note the details in the next journal entry. Journal entry dated 5th February 1984. Time of record 11 pm. I don't have much time. Hugo is dead and I have managed to hide in the cabin, away from its reach. God only knows how I was able to make it, but that is not the point. On February 1st, we were able to make out that the screams would start at about 10 pm and go on for the next 2 hours or so, but it was random. You could hear it at 12 am or you could hear it at 3 am. There was no set pattern. The screams may go on for short periods of time or could go on the whole night. So seeing this, Hugo and I made a plan to escape the cabin at exactly 9 pm on February 4th, just making a run for it and calling for help. That day we came very close to becoming cannon fodder for the creature. We hadn't expected this at all, and we immediately went inside and lit a fire to make it go away. And to our surprise, it worked. We were able to have a glimpse of the creature. It was covered in mud and was about 7 to 8 feet tall. But I would never forget the face. The face was enough to make even the devil shiver. It had these huge fangs and blood-red eyes. We were convinced that if we fall prey to this creature, we aren't going to make it. We had learned that the creature was afraid of fire, and it made sense. But we were so scared these past couple of days, we never noticed the fact that the screams always came at night. So we planned our escape and decided we will make a run for it the next morning and never look back. But Hugo told me otherwise. Stop acting afraid and let's fight this thing. We can't let the death of Jackson go in vain, man. I knew this was his inner soldier talking to me. Are you crazy? Do you want to die? I said in a surprised tone. Are you seeing this? We are completely out of rations, man. And if we don't get killed by God knows what is out in those woods, we are certainly going to die from starvation and no one will even know. Hugo said in frustration. I have to admit, he had a point, and this aligned with my fears about the same thing too. After giving a lot of thought, I agreed. Okay, what do we have to do to kill it? I asked. Hugo smiled and we immediately made a plan. Our plan was simple, to end the creature once and for all by lighting it on fire and grabbing our things and making a run for it. We loaded our rifles and waited for the screams to start. We must have waited for at least an hour or so when the screams started. So demonic, so horrifying. Hugo, perched behind the window upstairs in his room, shot at it a couple of times. It looked at him with menacing red eyes. We got his attention. Quick, grab the gasoline. Hugo shouted from upstairs. But just before I could make out what had happened, the creature gave out a menacing scream and shot itself at Hugo, breaking the glass and the wall on which it was fitted. I was scared now. The creature was now inside the cabin. I quickly hid in a closet and tried to keep as quiet as possible. I knew I wasn't going to make it. I had to find a way to my room and write my final message in my journal. The creature broke the kitchen ceilings and dropped down, almost 5 feet from me. I saw the creature this close for the first time. It was covered in mud and was ripped and strong and stood like a fire hydrant, which explained its strength. It had blood all over its hands, meaning it killed Hugo. It was searching for me now. After not finding me, it almost vanished into thin air in front of my eyes. I had only some gasoline left, so I lit the remaining wood logs in the fireplace and went upstairs to get my journal. To my horror, Hugo was dead and his blood was smeared all over the wall. It almost made me puke. As I grabbed my journal, an unseen force suddenly threw me into the wall. I could feel some of my bones breaking as the force of impact was so strong. To my horror, I realized that the creature had the ability to make itself invisible. I immediately ran downstairs, fighting pain and fear, and grabbed the gasoline and lit it on a nearby piece of cloth and threw it at the creature. It screamed in agony and vanished. Now my problems had just doubled and I was the only one in the cabin. I took Hugo and buried him in the backside of the cabin. I am scared and anxiety is kicking in. I cannot survive this. If anyone finds my journal, tell Jessica that I love her and to tell her to leave this god-forsaken forest forever and never return to Nebraska, ever. Journal entry dated 15th February 1984. Time of record not specified. This is the Mudman. My father told me about this mythical creature when I was a kid, but I thought it was a fairy tale or something. But trust me when I say this, the mudman exists, and once it marks you as a target, it is going to get you. According to my father, if your cabin entrance is covered with mud, that means the mudman has marked it as its territory, and anyone who sets foot into its territory will be killed one by one. I am the last one alive, and I am definitely certain that I will be killed by the mudman. I don't have any more gasoline to light a fire, which makes it open season for the creature. I am sitting in the living room, and I am writing this account for anyone who finds my journal. I can't take it anymore. The screams haven't stopped. The night seems to drag on, as this nightmare isn't in a mood to cease. It is becoming unbearable. The screams are growing louder and louder by the second, and I'm afraid that it is going to get me soon. I am not going to make it. I know. So I am writing this account in my journal for posterity. If you find my journal, that means I'm dead, and it got me. Please, save yourself from the mudman, or you will be its next target. To whoever finds this journal, please find Jessica Wallace and tell her that her daddy loves her. See you on the other side, sweetie. Goodbye. I was numb. I couldn't think straight. I dropped the diary on the floor. Jessica was sobbing uncontrollably. But as I came to my senses, I noticed the sun had set and it was almost getting dark out. Jessica, we need to get out of here. Hurry, get your things and let's go, I said, and we immediately got out of there, starting our hike down. As we went away from the cabin, Jessica and I heard the most horrifying scream we had ever heard. We ran. We didn't even look back. It was the mudman. We ran with all our might, but suddenly a big tree fell in front of us, which stopped us in our tracks. We had flashlights, and as we flashed it at the tree, our blood ran cold. The mudman was standing just a few feet away from us. William Wallace was right. It looked like the devil's incarnate. Then I remembered that I had a set of matches in my pocket, but I also knew that if I made a single move, it will be the end of me and Jessica. As I was thinking this, Jessica pulled out a revolver from a bag and fired at the demonic creature. Before I could make head or tail of what had happened, Jessica shouted, "Run, David! Run! I will kill it! You run! Live to tell the tale!" The mudman ran after her with ear-piercing screams that deafened me, but I didn't stop. I just ran and ran. As I made it out of the woods, I broke down and cried. Jessica sacrificed her life so that I could live. I immediately made it to the county sheriff and told them the whole tale. To my surprise, they laughed. But they did file a missing persons report stating that Jessica was missing, but I knew the worst had happened to her, and William, and his friends. I just knew, and that was enough. It was enough to make anyone question reality. By July of that year, the search party was called off, and Jessica and his father William and his friends were declared dead. I experienced nightmares after those events, and Jessica's screams came in my dreams every night. I was suffering from depression and became addicted to antidepressants for the better part of my late 40s. I soon took therapy for it, but no therapy or medication on earth can make those images and experiences go away. They still haunt me to this day. I immediately retired and moved out from Nebraska, swearing to never return again. It has been almost 40 years since that incident. The strangest thing was that the bodies of Jessica, William, and his friends were never found, and have never been found to this day. Even though I am safe from the mudman, the screams and Jessica's face haunt me in my sleep, and this is something I have to live with for the rest of my life. The world is full of evil that is far more sinister than a murder, kidnapping, or any heinous crime you could think of, or even I have ever experienced during my time as a private investigator. It was because of Jessica that I am able to share this story with you. Jessica, wherever you are, thank you. So that is it for today, folks. I hope you liked the story. Don't forget to follow me on all my major social media platforms, the links to which you can find in my description and also in the About page of my YouTube channel. So, until then, class dismissed.